Hey guys, Richard's podcast is called the Men of the House podcast, and we're going to put all that data. A lot of the people who listen to my podcast, Richard, is we have a high male population more than female. So all you men that listen to the podcast, go to the Men of House podcast and tap into Richard's wisdom and knowledge, man, to see how he can bring some insight into you, especially when one has been surrounded in an emergency situation or an emergency room and you see all those things, you understand the importance of living in the present, living now versus putting things off. As he said, things can change in a moment, and we know that for a sure that things are changed for a moment, life changing stuff. And so we're going to provide all those links for you guys to have access to him so that you can go there. Because I remember Richard, when I started mine, I wrote a book called Threads of Enlightenment. And the first 10 episodes was me talking about my chapters for each one chapter per episode. And then when I had to interview people, I started interviewing people because I know that was the next route. I shut down the podcast for a couple of months because I was terrified, because I knew that I had to become vulnerable to my audience, and I wasn't sure if I was able to do that. And I remember it took me about 2 months to walk through that. And when I got enough courage, man, I called my little brother who's been doing podcasts forever to be my first guest. And then went and I got a friend of his who was in the podcast to be the second guest because I was trying to stay safe. And that was before I opened up my calendar. And once I opened my calendar, man, it was like people were waiting for me just to put the thing back up. And boom, it never stopped growing after that. So, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And learning how to become vulnerable is a necessary step in your healing. Everyone that is listening, you have to become vulnerable. It's a necessary step for your healing. Become vulnerable because that's where it begins. And once you start there, you'll be able to move through. Again, Richard, thank you, man, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. We're going to put all of your stuff in your for our audience to get to you, because I want you guys to get to him, because not everyone has all the answers. You may get into his space and the answer that you needed is right there. So check Richard out. Go to the Men of the House podcast and get some insight there. Richard, thank you so much for coming, man.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And, I like to leave everyone with one thing is go out and be the person that you'd like to meet.
I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, Richard.
All right.